Okay, thank you. So my presentation will be on racism and racial discrimination in the USSR during the interwar period and Second World War, particularly period of time between 1917 and 1945. More so, really 1937 to 1945. So, the first thing, I think the definition. So, define both what I mean by racism and racial discrimination. The similar, but racism here being more of a scholarly definition I'm using, derived primarily from George Fredrickson, who is now deceased, but of course wrote a lot on the issue from a comparative point of view regarding U.S. and South African history. And then for racial discrimination, a more legalistic view within international law, but of course coming after the period of time dealing with the 1967 International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. So. Racism is first and foremost, in the definition I'm using, a matter of differential treatment rather than a mindset or prejudice here. So we'll be dealing with state institutions and their discrimination and exclusion of certain groups of people based upon ancestry and kin. Will not be focusing on any types of theory regarding genetics or biology. In this sense, I'm following in George Fredrickson's definition, quote, the essence of racism is not biological determinism per se, but the positing on whatever basis of unbridgeable differences between ethnic or descent groups, distinctions that are then used to justify their different treatment. And so the different treatment being the denial of rights, opportunities, and resources to certain groups because they belong to categories based upon descent and lineage and ancestry. And these categories are defined as being immutable or unchangeable. So in particular here in the case of the Soviet Union, administrative exile imposed upon ethnic Koreans internally deported from the Soviet Far East into Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan in 1937. And then other groups, nationalnosti, the term used by the Soviets, really racialized ethnicity, during the Second World War, starting with Germans and then Karachais, Kalmyks, Chechens, English, Karachai, Balkars, Crimean Tatars, and Meskhetian Turks. So, in the 1930s, Nationalnost becomes attached to the identification documents and internal passports of all Soviet citizens. And in 1938, it becomes impossible to legally choose a nationalnost different from your biological parentage. This is fixed during the Great Terror to prevent people who are of German and Polish nationality, mostly, ancestors who had come from that region, spoke those regions and spoke those languages, from changing their as a racialized ethnic category to one that was not being stigmatized and targeted for arrest and execution. So that happens in April of 1938 at the NKVD, the People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs, the political police, make Nationalnost a hard category. And because it is based upon ancestry, I'm treating it here as a racialized category using the definitions of Fredrickson. But also, if we look at later legal definitions, the ICE International Convention eliminate all forms of racial discrimination. Does include ethnicity and national origins as being types of racial discrimination for purposes of international law. So, the ICRD definition here, quote, any distinction, restriction, or preference based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin, which prevents individuals from fully exercising their human rights. So this is would fit. Nationalnosti is a combination, as I said, of ethnic, cultural attributes, but also biological, ancestral, and therefore racial ones. But even if it wasn't national or ethnic origin, would still qualify under the, of course, as I noted, under Fredrickson, the important thing is immutable categories of ancestry and kinship rather than a specific biology or genetics. So during a period of time, we're talking about the number of people who are internally deported in the Soviet Union on the basis of their nationalnost and not any other reasons, is over 2 million people, and about 500,000 of those people perish prematurely as a result of material deprivation in their new areas of settlement within about 4 to 5 years. And in the case of the Chechens, it's much higher, about a third rather than a fifth of the population dying. So in the fall of 1937, the Soviet government deports over 172,000 ethnic Koreans from the Far East into Central Asia, and they are placed under administrative exile. And this basically restricts where they can live, their ability to move, and change their places of residency, and this also has secondary effects on education and employment. And these restrictions will last up until the 1950s, following the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953. But will be repeated this pattern of wholesale deportations of national minorities and small ethnic groups, many of them indigenous to the places they are deported from, into Kazakhstan, Central Asia, and Siberia. So the 1941 to 1944, ethnic Germans in the Volga, Ukraine, other parts of European USSR deported to Siberia and Kazakhstan. 1943, Karachais deported from the Caucasus to Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. Also 1943, the Kalmucks deported from the Caspian Sea coast to Siberia. North Caucasians, Chechens, and English, as well as Balkars, deported in 1944 to Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. Crimean Tatars deported mostly to Uzbekistan in 1944. And then finally, in November 1944, Meskhetian Turks deported from Georgia into Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. So they are placed under the Department of Special Settlements, which is under the NKVD, and the Severe restrictions on the right to choose their residency, move from place to place. A system of passes is imposed. They need basically an internal passport to move from their assigned villages to other places, even if very short distances, such as a market. And this, of course, prevents people from pursuing and continuing their education. Is disrupted for many children and adolescents. It prevents them from working in many places since they cannot move beyond about 3 kilometer radius from where they are assigned. It basically confines them to these very small areas of internal exile, and they are used primarily for menial agricultural labor, but there are cases, particularly as the war goes on, of them being used in various industries, particularly extractive industries. But I won't go deep into that because time is limited here. So they are placed under a special system of commanders, commandanturi, working for the NKVD and later MVD, and these men are responsible for keeping the deportees, people deported on the basis of their nationalnost, under surveillance, as well as imposing discipline upon them, and particularly preventing them from moving from their assigned places without special permission. So, as I said, they needed passes, which would have the destinations of the trip, length and date authorized, and reason. And these slips typically were only good for 3 days, so they could go to one place and back for short trips if they had special permission. And there is a tightening of restrictions. 8th January 1945 is streamlined. Basically, the SNK, the Commissariat, Council of People's Commissariat, USSR, issues a one-page decree summarizing the rights and restrictions on special settlers, but in particular, Article number 3, they did not have the right without the authorization of the NKVD Special Commandant to be absent from the boundaries of the region of settlement served by the Special Commandant, and that voluntary absences from this region would be viewed as flight and treated as a criminal matter. They also had to report all changes in their family, births, deaths, escapes to this commandant within 3 days. And the commandant could issue administrative punishments of up to 5 days arrest or 100 rubles fine for any violation of social order or existing regime. So this will also be tightened in the future, where they will have to report on a monthly basis to the special commandant to give the summary of their activities to the political police. So these restrictions based upon their ethnic heritage and not their actual live culture, but based upon biological descent from it, made a hierarchical system where you had a large category of people, over 2 million. Largest were Germans, over 1 million, that had second-class citizenship in the Soviet Union, even though they had not been individually tried or convicted of any crimes, they had severe restrictions placed upon them by administrative decree of the Soviet government. This is tightened again once more, 26 November 1948. Presidium of the Supreme Soviet, in order to prevent, again, unauthorized movement, what it called escapes, from assigned places of living for special settlers, issues a decree that makes such escapes punishable by 20 years of hard labor, and people assisting them that are free citizens liable to 5 years imprisonment. So I just want to read briefly. With the goal of strengthening the regime of settlement for those exiled by supreme organs of the USSR in the period of the Fatherland War, Chechens, Karachais, English, Balkars, Kalmucks, Germans, Crimean Tatars, and others that at the time of the resettlement there was not a specified length of their exile, establishes that those resettled to distant regions of the Soviet Union by decrees of people in high leadership are exiled forever, without the right to return to their previous places of residence. So the first thing it does is it makes it permanent for the deportees that were deported on the basis of being members of the Nationalnosti. And of course, the permanence was initially conceived to go into future generations. And then for the voluntarily leaving or flight from places of obligatory settlement, as those exiles that are guilty will be subject to prosecution for criminal acts. It is determined the punishment for this crime is 20 years of hard labor. All right, so they can be put in a labor camp and used for very difficult physical task as a result of violating this decree, which has no end in sight. Of course, it is repealed contingent by contingent for the special settlers beginning 13th of December 1955 for the Germans, and ending in July 1956 for the Chechens, English, and Karachais. But it is a quite severe and draconian law aimed at people specifically targeted on the basis of their ancestry, and of course it makes the punishment eternal. There is no way to escape it for the children of these deportees. All right, so to wrap it up, sum it up, during this time, 1917, all the way up until the end of 1945, there's a lot of changes in the Soviet Union. But in the Stalin era, particularly after the 1936 Soviet Constitution, there is a move to concentrate on enemy peoples, groups that are defined by ethno-racial categorization rather than class. So rather than deporting kulaks, we see in 1937 deportation of ethnic Koreans, all of those in the Soviet Far East, into Central Asia as administrative exiles. And we see in the Second World War that's repeated, first with the Germans, and then Karachais, Kalmucks, Chechens, English, Balkars, Crimean Tatars, and Meskhetian Turks. And we see it tightening, of course, at the end of the war, when the Germans are losing and have already lost after 9th of May 1945. But all of the mass movement and imposition of disabilities on the basis of ethnicity occur within this period of time, 1917, 1945, so specifically within the period of time 1937 to 1944, so a period of time of 7 years during which Stalin is undisputed head of the Soviet government, and the power of the political police, the NKVD, is basically unchallenged. So thank you.